Ashley's voice, the flight attendant, cut the smooth murmur of the cabin, resonating like an authoritarian command. "Last call to move to the bottom of the plane, or I'll call security." His voice carried a layer of contempt, every heavy word as if testing the patience of the passengers. Madeline, a serene and calm-looking woman, responded with a tranquility that contrasted with the tone of the flight attendant. "I already said I won't move." His almost whispered answer was a demonstration of silent firmness, but full of a force that seemed to challenge the environment around him. Although his voice was soft, the energy emanating from Madeline was undeniable. She was being publicly challenged, but no one still knew the depth of her inner strength, and what happened next no one could predict. Madeline, the woman who seemed so discreet and reserved, got up with a haughty posture and looked straight at Ashley. What followed was a revelation, not only of its position but of its true nature. As the plane flying over the golden evening clouds, with its elegant appearance reflecting the sun, the cabin was full of a palpable luxury. The interior gleamed with gold details, soft leather seats that suggested a distant world of the ordinary. Each passenger seemed to be part of a silent elite, with designer bags and concentrated looks, immersed in a scenario of opulence. The crew, with its impeccable uniforms, circulated with dexterity, offering champagne and meeting the demands with a smile that reflected the sophistication of the environment. Among these passengers was Madeline Stevens. In her early 30s, she emanated an undisturbed calm, wearing a navy blue blazer and combining pants that made her a subtle, elegant study. His presence was remarkable, not for any effort to stand out, but for his serene composure. She watched the plane, not as a simple passenger, but as someone with a purpose. The fate of that trip was not a simple luxury journey, but the control of an empire that it was about to expand even more. Ashley, the boss, was near the entrance, watching with a close look. His perfect uniform, his striking features, and his strict posture exuded authority. She greeted passengers with a cold education, but there was something in her gaze that denounced a deep desire to maintain order at any cost. As she approached Madeline, her smile disappeared quickly, replaced by a protocol greeting. "Welcome on board," Ashley said, but the lack of warmth in his voice was palpable. Madeline, although not showing, realized the subtle change. She looked over her shoulder, watching the contrast between the greeting to her and the one who was given to the couple Anderson, who settled right behind. Ashley's smile, radiant and genuine, seemed to reserve for those whose faces were familiar to him, whose clothes and behaviors were approved by his rigid vision of order. While the other passengers settled, Ashley circulated through the cabin accurately, checking the order and ensuring that everything was in place. When she passed the Anderson couple, she was kind, asking if there was anything else they could want. But when his eyes fell on Madeline's bag, his expression hardened. The bag was impeccably positioned, but Ashley's gaze was fulminating, loaded with non-verbal judgment. She didn't say a word, but her disdain was clear as she passed quickly, without offering any courtesy. Have you ever been like something similar? Have you noticed how people treatment can change based on what they think of their appearance? Share your experience in the comments below and subscribe to the channel. Ashley, in his 40s, carried with him a posture of those who could not tolerate disorder. Her perfectly aligned uniform and impeccably tidy hair conveyed the image of someone who lived to control every aspect of her life. For her, appearance was everything. Her gaze narrowed as she watched Madeline settling. Something about the woman, in her serenity, seemed to bother Ashley. It was not your outfit, nor the confidence that transparent in your gestures. It was the lack of haste to draw attention, an attitude that Ashley, in his rigid worldview, interpreted as something out of place. In Ashley's mind, Madeline did not belong to that space. She approached with firm steps. The tension is already starting to take over the cabin. "Excuse me, ma'am," said Ashley, the forced smile keeping on his face, but with a fierce of condescension. "I think you're in the wrong session." Madeline looked up at her, keeping her expression unchanged, quiet as always. "I believe this is my seat," he answered calmly, his voice firm but without losing his serenity. Ashley's smile remained, but now it carried a sharper tone. "I don't believe. This section is for our elite passengers." The buzz between passengers began to grow. A curious socialite leaned over to observe better, while a businessman on the other side of the corridor raised his eyebrow, bothered by Ashley's attitude. Madeline did not go up. Her gaze remained fixed on Ashley as she answered with a soft but penetrating tone, You may see the passenger list before you make assumptions. Ashley's irritation transparent, his eyebrows frowning. I know exactly who belongs to this place and who does not belong, she replied, the voice now harsh. The tension in the air increased every second. The surrounding passengers exchanged stealthy glances, some muttering each other, some visibly uncomfortable with the scene. Why doesn't she move to the bottom if she's in the wrong seat? Has anyone whispered. She must be trying to hit her upgrade, another has responded in a low tone. Ashley, visibly annoyed, crossed his arms and increased the volume of his voice. If you don't go to the bottom now, she said, with a voice clear and strong enough for everyone to hear, I'll call security. Madeline tilted her head slightly, her unobsequious countenance. Call who you need, he answered firmly, but without lifting his voice. I won't move. The socialite let out a soft sigh, while the businessman seemed to ponder what was happening. Ashley, now completely frustrated, turned to Grace, a younger stew that was nearby, watching the scene with a certain nervousness. Grace, Ashley said in a sharp voice, take her to the bottom now. Grace hesitated, his eyes going from Madeline to Ashley. She wanted to suggest that Ashley confer the list, but her boss's fulminating look made her hesitate. Finally, Grace took a hesitant step forward. Madeline moved slightly in her seat, still calm. You may have to reconsider your action, she said softly, but with an intensity that seemed to cross the cabin. Ashley, discharge, laughed and dismissed the warning. I know exactly what I'm doing, he replied, his harsher voice. Now get up. What would you do if it were Madeline? And what do you think about the treatment she received? Share your opinions in the comments below. And if you are enjoying the story so far, don't forget to enjoy and sign up for more. Ashley's tone became even more incisive, his hand pointing to the bottom of the plane. You shouldn't be here, he said, impatience now evident in his voice. The cabin was absolutely silent. The passengers watched, astonished, as if they were witnessing a silent battle. Madeline, in turn, leaned back a little back in her seat, her fixed look at Ashley. You shouldn't make assumptions about others, he said in a low but weightful. Ashley's smile, once tense, widened. And you shouldn't be sitting where you didn't pay, he replied with the same acidity. It was then that Madeline, without haste, took her cell phone. She typed something quickly and put him back on armrest, her still quiet expression. You're making a mistake, he said simply, but certainty in his voice made the words resonate in the air. Ashley, however, did not hear. We'll see, he murmured, pointing to Grace once again. The new flight approached with cautious steps, her uncomfortable posture contrasting with Ashley's confidence. Each time the flight attendant hesitated, Ashley became more impatient, and the situation seemed about to burst. The eyes of the passengers around the surroundings were fixed on the growing impasse, as if witnessing an unusual scene. Ashley's voice, sharp and full of authority, echoed through the hall. This is dragging too much. If you don't leave now, I'll call security. His words were like an order, but Madeline, unshakable, showed no hurry to give in. I won't move, he said directly without raising his voice. His calm seemed to challenge Ashley's own irritation, which only made the most tense situation. The woman ahead, with her hair impeccably tidy and an aura of arrogance, leaned over to her friend next door and spoke low, but audible to everyone. I think she's trying to strike a flight for free. Ashley smiled, a smile that overflowed superiority. Exactly what it seems, he said, turning to the other passengers as if he sought support. The rules exist for a reason, but it seems that some do not understand them. Madeline was not shaken by the murmurs, nor with the veiled criticism. She kept her posture firm without one more word, which seemed to make Ashley even more furious. Grace, who watched everything closely, hesitated. She approached the passenger list in the cabin, looking for any sign that could help Madeline. But before he could speak out, Ashley, with a sharp tone, interrupted. Grace, what are you doing? Go back to your place. Grace, visibly nervous, bit her lip. I was just checking, he tried to explain, but his voice hesitated. You have nothing to do with it, Ashley cut her. The flight attendant retreated, feeling the weight of the pressure, divided between doing what he thought is right and the fear of challenging his boss. Across the hallway, a man-looking man in formal clothes leaned slightly, interested in the situation. Excuse me, he said with a kind smile. How are you here? Madeline, without losing the composure, answered calmly, Yes, I'm fine, thank you. Before man could say anything else, Ashley intervened with an accusing attitude. Sir, I would prefer not to feed this confusion. She turned to Madeline, pointing firmly. You are causing a riot. The man, still calm, raised an eyebrow. "It seems that the turmoil is you," he replied, his serene voice but with a tone of rebuke. Ashley's expression became even more tense. She took a deep breath, trying to control anger. "Just," he said, already without patience. "Either you move now, or I guarantee you will be taken from this flight." Madeline, without even blinking, looked straight into Ashley's eyes and replied with a disconcerting calm, "You can try." Madeline's words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Ashley feel even more frustrated. Ashley, not knowing how to react, turned, returning to his work routine, but with his face still flushed by anger. She walked quickly down the hallway, her steps firm and decided as she carried a drink tray. Madeline, on the other hand, was still quiet, immersed in reading her book, as if nothing had happened. The murmurs around declined, but the tension still hovered in the air. The passengers spoke again with each other, but an atmosphere of discomfort settled. Ashley, now visibly uncomfortable, served the other passengers quickly, avoiding looking at Madeline. Finally, when the tray was almost empty, Madeline looked up and, with remarkable calm, asked, "Excuse me, could you bring me some water?" Ashley, who was already passing through her, looked at Madeline with a look at contempt. "When I finish with others," he said, without even stopping. She passed straight, without more words, leaving Madeline sitting without hurry to do anything. The minutes passed, and Madeline settled in her seat, trying to find a more comfortable position. She stretched a leg slightly in the hallway, her discreet movement. Ashley came back, tray in hand, his attentive eyes capturing the small adjustment. Instead of asking Madeline to move her leg, Ashley deliberately changed her way. In an instant, Ashley's foot hit Madeline's leg. The tray tilted, and the glasses of water fell forward, spreading on the lap of Madeline and on the floor. Ashley gave a theatrical sigh, your high voice. "Look where you walk. You made a mess." The passengers turned their heads, frightened by the commotion. Madeline looked up, surprised but composed, as her hands brushed the water on her pant. "You bumped into my leg," she said calmly. Madeline tilted her head slightly, her calm and unshakable look. "I just asked to be treated with the same respect as everyone else," she replied. "And if this is too much to ask, then you may be who doesn't belong here." The words hovered in the air, a silent but powerful rebuke. Ashley's face blushed with anger. She approached, her frustration boiling. "Do you think you can talk like this to me?" Then, in a shocking moment, unable to contain herself, Ashley raised her hand and slapped Madeline's face. The sound echoed through the sharp and shocking cabin. Sighs spread throughout the passengers. The businessman stood halfway through his face, a mixture of disbelief and anger. Grace's hands flew to the mouth, his eyes wide with horror. Even the curious socialite seemed surprised, her previous smile replaced by a look of discomfort. Madeline slowly straightened, her hand resting calmly on her lap. His expression remained composed, but his fixed look at Ashley carried a weight that made the woman hesitate for the first time. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," said Madeline softly, her calm voice, but cutting the air like a knife. "What would you do if you were in Madeline? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story has hooked you, click like and subscribe now." Madeline looked at Ashley, her firm and composed voice. "I was patient with you, but your behavior has crossed the line," she said, her deliberate and firm words. Ashley's expression darkened, his jaw squeezed and his hands closed by his body. "Passing the boundary," she snapped, her voice rising. "You are the one who has been causing problems since entering this plane." Madeline was not intimidated. She did not touch her face or responded with the same aggression. Instead, he slowly straightened his posture, his fixed and firm look at Ashley. His calm behavior remained intact, even in the face of such blatant aggression. "You'll regret it," Madeline said softly, her voice carrying a silent authority that seemed to fill the entire cabin. Ashley hesitated for a moment, his confidence shaken by Madeline's inflexible composure, but she quickly recovered, mocking loudly. "Regret?" she mocked. "What are you going to do, call the police?" Madeline didn't answer because she didn't need to. His silence spoke for himself, and the passengers could feel the change of power in the cabin. From the corner of the cabin, Grace, the younger flight, watched the scene with a mixture of horror and determination. She had silently accompanied Ashley's behavior throughout the flight, and her discomfort grew every moment. Now she knew she couldn't stay silent anymore. Discreetly, Grace moved away from the confusion, took his cell phone, and quickly dialed a number. Its fingers were shaking slightly, but the call was connected. His voice was whispered, but firm. "It's Grace. We have a situation on the plane." She returned to her post with a worried but determined countenance. Ashley, oblivious to the call, was with his arms crossed, the visible anger on his face, but his authority began to disappear in the face of the situation. Madeline, in contrast, remained calm, her unchanging posture a lighthouse of tranquility amid the whirlwind. The passengers, silent, exchanged glances, some restless, some simply observing, not knowing what would happen next. One of the passengers leaned to Madeline, his low, worried voice. "Are you okay?" Madeline, without losing her composure, responded with a soft smile. "I'm fine," she said, her quiet voice, despite the tension that filled the cabin. The buzz of the plane engines was the only sound that broke the silence, making the environment even more expectant. Madeline, now visibly annoyed, looked at Ashley, her sharp voice. "All you needed to do was treat me with respect, but you failed." Ashley's anger increased, his tightening on the strongest tray. "Respect? Maybe you need to deserve it first," she said with a tone of contempt. The stress in the cabin was palpable. Nervous passengers, not knowing how to react. Ashley turned, trying to appear confident, but something bothered her deeply. She knew she had crossed a line, and although she did not admit, she felt that she was being observed, judged. Passengers' eyes, the horrified expression on Grace's face, and Madeline's unflameled posture made Ashley feel increasingly uncomfortable. The pressure seemed to increase, as if the cabin walls were closing on it. Trying to get rid of this feeling, his thoughts began to run. What if this woman is not who I think she is? Madeline's behavior, her calm and authority, were beginning to make Ashley question her own assumptions. For the first time, a spark of doubt began to penetrate its anger. While reviving moments in his mind, Ashley's restlessness grew even more. Why didn't she shouted or retaliated? This question echoed in his head, making discomfort even more intense. She swallowed hard, and when the record finally fell, Ashley's stomach turned. She had allowed her prejudice and anger to control her, and now she could feel that problems were forming. She looked around the cabin, hoping to find some support, but the reality hit her. The passengers were no longer by her side. The businessman stared at her with his arms crossed, his silent judgment, of course, as the day. The curious socialite, who once whispered in a mocking tone, now shook her head in disapproval. Grace, visibly uncomfortable, held the passenger list with tremendous hand. Madeline, on the other hand, continued to exude calm. Sitting, she crossed her legs slowly, relying on a silent confidence that only increased Ashley's discomfort. Madeline didn't need words or gestures. His silence made Ashley feel small and unable to escape the consequences of his actions. The voltage in the cabin was at the limit, and Ashley felt that the control was escaping from his hands. But despite her growing anger, she couldn't keep the feeling that what she had done had greater consequences than she imagined. Madeline's words have resonated in your mind. You are making a mistake. Without Ashley knew, Madeline had already sent a message. His silent response to the slap was not a sign of weakness, but strategy. The woman she had underestimated was about to show how great the mistake made. The atmosphere was heavy, and Ashley walked from side to side near Madeline, frustration bubbling in her chest. Madeline, still calm, did not move. She remained sitting, her stance unshakable. Ashley's restlessness increased even more when he saw Madeline get her cell phone, her deliberate movements. She typed something quickly and put the device into the armrest beside him. The simple gesture seemed to be loaded with power, making Ashley wonder what Madeline was doing. "What do you think you're doing?" Ashley asked, her acute and impatient voice. Madeline did not respond immediately. Instead, it leaned slightly back, still serene. "You'll find out soon," she said softly, her words penetrating Ashley's mind as a warning. The cabin fell into uncomfortable silence, with passengers exchanging stealthy glances. The socialite leaned to her mate and with a whisper asked, "What's going on? Do you think she's someone important?" The entrepreneur on the other side of the corridor watched Madeline with renewed attention, his insightful look at her. He hit his fingers in armrest, as if he had realized something no one else had noticed. Minutes later, the steps of Passos echoed in the cabin, and the control cabin door opened. The pilot came out, his pale face and the tense, visibly worried expression. He walked quickly through the cabin, passing through Grace and the other passengers, until he arrived at Ashley, who was still visibly annoyed. Seeing him approaching, she turned, the frustration stamped on her face. "What is happening?" she asked, her sharp voice as if waiting for another situation to be resolved by her. The pilot stopped in front of her, his rigid body. "You need to get away," he said, his voice firm, but with a slight tremor that denounced the discomfort of the situation. Ashley frowned, his evident confusion. "Excuse me," she answered, crossing her arms in a challenging way. "Why would I need to get away? I'm dealing with it." The pilot looked at Madeline, then turned his attention to Ashley. "I just received a management connection. The owner of the plane is on board, and she is Miss Stevens here," said the pilot, pointing directly to Madeline. His words fell on the cabin like thunder. Immediately the passengers began to murmur, and sighs of surprise echoed through the air. The socialite, once curious and discharged, now looked from Madeline to Ashley, her almost inaudible voice. "She owns the plane." The businessman, sitting on the other side, shook his head with a discreet smile, as if he had discovered something important. "I already suspected," he murmured to himself. Grace, who was near the kitchen, froze. The expression on his face changed relief to a genuine surprise when the truth fell on it. Madeline was not just another passenger, she was someone much more influential than anyone had imagined. Ashley, with the color coming out of his face, looked at the pilot, his confidence starting to collapse. That can't be true," she stammered, her voice now trembling and without usual sharpness. "There must be a mistake." The silence that followed was heavy, the tension in the almost palpable air. The passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, the memory of the slap still fresh in their minds. Ashley was near the hallway, his arms crossed in resistance, but his discomfort was now visible. Madeline, however, remained calm, her unshakable posture as usual. Without further words, the captain's voice came from the speaker, interrupting the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will make an undressed landing. Please remain sitting and prepare for the descent." "Day!" The murmurs of confusion spread across the cabin, with the passengers exchanging perplexed looks. The businessman, leaning over at Madeline, whispered, "What is happening? Why are we landing?" Madeline, however, did not answer. His expression remained serene, but his gaze was enigmatic. Ashley's eyebrows frowned and his confidence hesitated. She looked nervously to the front of the cabin, waiting for an explanation that was not coming. The plane landed softly, and minutes later, an elegant black SUV parked on the track, its engine turning off with a soft snoring. The doors of the vehicle opened, and two well-dressed assistants came out quickly, their imposing and silent presence. They climbed the plane steps with a silent authority, demanding everyone's attention in the cabin. As soon as they entered, one of the assistants approached Madeline with a respectful smile. "Miss Stevens, everything is ready for your analysis," he said, his cordial and defendant voice. Sighs of surprise and shock traveled the cabin. Ashley froze, his pale expression as the chip fell. "Miss Stevens," she murmured, her voice almost a whisper. The assistants, however, completely ignored Ashley and totally focused on Madeline. "Do you need something before we go on?" he asked one of them, with respectful kindness. Madeline got up slowly, her graceful and controlled movements. She adjusted the blazer with calm precision, her posture radiating an authority that now seemed impossible to ignore. All passengers watched in silence, astonished by what was happening. When Madeline finally spoke, her voice cut the silence of the cabin firmly and clearly. "I'm Madeline Stevens," she started, her gaze through the passenger cabin, all now focused on her. "I am the owner of this plane, and I am also the owner of this airline." Ashley's mouth opened and closed, but no word came out. The arrogance she sported was disappeared, replaced by a mixture of panic and shame. She found herself reduced to a pale shadow of the woman who, minutes before, seemed so confident. Madeline, with a calm that seemed undisturbed, slowly turned to her, her sharp voice like a blade. "Ashley, her behavior today was nothing less than shameful," she said, her words resonating in the air. "You humiliated yourself, mistreated a passenger, and lame while the reputation of this airline." Ashley stammered, his trembling voice. "I didn't know." But Madeline didn't allow her to end. Raising her hand, she silenced the flight attendant with a simple but imposing gesture. "You didn't know why you didn't bother to treat me with the respect that every passenger deserves," he said, his voice firm and without margin for contestation. Instead, he made assumptions, acted with prejudice, and intensified a situation that could have been resolved with basic decency. Support murmurs began to grow among the passengers, who had once watched in silence. Some nodded in agreement, and Mr. Anderson, with his face lit with admiration, folded the newspaper carefully and made a slight nod of approval for Madeline. The tension in the air seemed to dissipate, replaced by a sense of justice being done. Madeline got got up with deliberate and controlled movements and adjusted her blazer. She looked straight at Ashley, who unsuccessfully tried to hide the discomfort that now took over her body. "There is no mistake in his actions, Ashley," Madeline said, with an authority that made the cabin silence. Ashley's eyes moved frantically around the room, trying to find support, but no one seemed willing to intervene. Passengers watched carefully, some discreetly recording the scene with their cell phone. Madeline stepped ahead, and her voice was even firmer. "While you were busy judging me, you didn't do your work. Your job is to treat each passenger with respect, no matter who they are or what you suppose about them. And now there are consequences." Madeline's words reverberated in the cabin, and Ashley felt her body shrink. She wanted to answer, defend herself, but the words didn't come out. Her chest squeezed with the pressure of all eyes on her, and for the first time, her trust completely hesitated. Madeline made a gesture for the pilot. "I want this to be resolved immediately," he ordered, his voice without margin for discussion. "And I want to make sure it doesn't happen with anyone again." The pilot, unfoldable, nodded. "Understood, Miss Stevens," he replied, keeping his professional posture. Ashley stepped back, her mind spinning in panic. She looked over, her instincts shouting to escape before things got worse, but before she could take a step, the pilot entered her way. "You won't go anywhere," he said firmly. Madeline, with an impassive look, turned to Ashley once again. "Ashley, your actions today proved that you are inappropriate for this position. From now on, you are fired." Madeline's words fell like a final verdict, and Ashley, without reaction, stepped back. His confidence broke down, and she was speechless, completely defeated. "Please, Miss Stevens," she whispered, her embargoed voice. "I didn't want to." Madeline's expression hardened, and she answered coldly, "You didn't want to be caught, but it was, and now you will face the consequences." At this point, two uniformed police officers entered the cabin, their immediate and imposing presence. The murmurs of surprise and apprehension began to spread among the passengers. Ashley was pale to see them approaching. "Miss Stevens," said one of the police with a respectful tone, "we received your report. Are you submitting a complaint?" Madeline, without hesitation, looked at the police and said firmly, "Yes, this person beat me in front of several witnesses. I hope it is responsible." Ashley gasped, her mind running as she tried to defend herself. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding," she shouted, her desperate voice. "I didn't want to—" But before I could continue, the policeman stepped forward and removed a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Madam, you are trapped by aggression," he said, in a serious and authoritarian voice. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court." Ashley's breathing accelerated when the reality of his situation hit her in full force. She looked at Madeline, who remained calm and composed, her unbeatable posture. Ashley's hands were handcuffed behind their backs, and tears began to run down his face. "Please, Miss Stevens, I'm sorry," she sobbed, her broken voice. But Madeline, without showing any emotion, just replied, "Your apology means nothing without responsibility. You have made your choices. You will now face the consequences." The passengers watched in silence, astonished, while Ashley was taken by the police. The hit had arrived, and Ashley knew there was no way to escape. The passengers watched silently, their eyes fixed in Ashley as she disappeared through the hallway, taken by the police. The flight attendant, which was once dominant, was now a defeated figure, his arrogance replaced by repentance and humiliation. Madeline, with her unshakable posture, returned to the cabin, her firm, clear voice as she went to the passengers. "To all here, I apologize for what you had to witness today," she said, her serious expression. "This is not the standard of service I expect in my planes. From now on, we will ensure that all passengers are treated with the dignity and respect they deserve." The cabin broke out in applause, applauding with enthusiasm. Mr. Anderson, with a discreet smile, gave a small salary, while Mrs. Anderson, leaving his knitting aside, applauded politely. The atmosphere had completely changed, and relief seemed to spread throughout the cabin. Madeline turned to Grace, the youngest flight attendant. She had supported her during the incident. His tone softened, recognizing the professionalism of his colleague. "Grace," said Madeline, "I noticed her exemplary behavior today. Thank you for manifesting yourself when it was necessary. You will receive a contact from my office about a promotion." Grace's eyes widened, and she nodded quickly, her bright face of gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Stevens," he answered softly. Madeline smiled briefly before going to the exit. Her assistants followed her closely. The atmosphere on the plane was unrecognizable, with the previous tension replaced by a sense of admiration and relief. As Madeline walked down the hallway, the passengers did not hide their smiles. The curious woman, who had observed the whole scene carefully, leaned forward in her seat. "Miss Stevens, you are amazing," he exclaimed, the admiration evident in his voice. Madeline turned to her, offering a kind smile. "Thank you," he replied with serenity. "Remember this moment. It is always worth defending what is right." Later, the fresh air of the track greeted Madeline, which was received by her black SUV, with the driver holding the open door. Her assistants walked beside her, informing her of her next meeting, but Madeline was absorbed in the events of the day. She knew that incident would not be forgotten anytime soon. That night, in a televised interview, Madeline was sitting in an elegant studio. The visibly impressed interviewer leaned forward. "Miss Stevens, your story went viral. Millions of people saw how you dealt with this situation. What message would you like to send?" Madeline looked straight into the camera, her voice clear and resolute. "Respect is a right, not a privilege," she said. "Everyone deserves dignity, no matter how they come from or what others suppose about them. The true leadership is about establishing this pattern and ensuring that it is maintained." The interviewer nodded, visibly played. "And what would you say to those who have faced similar challenges but don't have the platform you have?" Madeline's expression softened. "I would say that strength comes from within, even when you feel invisible. Remember your value. You do not need a title or wealth to demand respect. You just need to stay firm in who you are." Weeks later, Madeline boarded another flight. This time, it was received by a different crew whose energy was warm and welcoming. The leading team chief greeted her with a genuine smile. "Welcome on board, Miss Stevens. It is an honor to have her with us." Madeline returned the smile, feeling the lighter and more respectful atmosphere. The change was evident. Respect now filled the air, and Madeline knew that she had contributed somehow to this transformation. It was not just about confronting prejudice or reaffirming its authority, but of turning a moment of humiliation into a powerful lesson, one that would reverberate far beyond that only flight. Madeline smiled at herself, her weekly visible reflection in the window. She knew this was just the beginning. With each decision, each policy, and each act of leadership, it was shaping a future where respect and kindness were the standard, not the exception. The plane was flying louder and louder, the engines with softly as it moved toward its destination. Madeline, sitting in charge of her vision, felt a silent triumph that no turbulence would ever shake. She knew the battle had been won, but the impact would be felt far beyond that flight. In a public statement released shortly after the flight, Madeline spoke directly to the world. His words carried a message that resonated far beyond the limits of the luxury jet. "It's not about appearances," she said in a sincere video that quickly became viral. "It's about the experience we create for everyone. The real success is measured not for what you can pay, but how you treat others." The statement triggered conversations on social networks, with people applauding Madeline's leadership and her commitment to change. Hashtags as "respect above all" and Madeline's vision were trend for days, inspiring others to reflect on their own behavior and prejudice. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share with the people around you, said the video, ending with an invitation to spread the message. Thus, the story of Madeline Stevens, the owner of the plane that fought for respect and justice, echoed around the world, inspiring changes and reminding everyone that true greatness lies in the way we treat others. The months following that fateful flight brought a wave of transformations to the Madeline airline and the aviation industry as a whole. The new policies of inclusion and respect, implemented with a firm pulse, not only raised the customer service pattern, but also created a more welcoming and equitable work environment for employees. Diversity came to be valued and celebrated, and regular sensitivity training was instituted for all team members. Madeline's story, far from being forgotten, has become a case study in business schools and an inspiring example in leadership seminars. His name became synonymous with courage, integrity, and commitment to justice. It has become a respected and influential public figure, using its platform to defend important causes and inspire significant changes in society. Ashley herself, after the lawsuit and the period of imprisonment, underwent a journey of self-knowledge. He sought therapy, where he confronted his own prejudices and the origin of his discriminatory behavior. Although he did not recover her work in aviation, she became an active voice in the fight against prejudice and in favor of inclusion. illusion. Her regret was genuine, and she dedicated herself to makeup, using her experience to educate and make others aware of the damage caused by discrimination. Grace, the young steward who spoke in favor of Madeline, raised rapidly in the airline hierarchy. His promotion was just the beginning of a promising career, marked by his dedication, professionalism, and courage. She became a model for other young women who dreamed of working in aviation, proving that integrity and respect are essential qualities for success. The couple Anderson, who witnessed the situation firsthand, became a faithful defender of Madeline. They fly exclusively with her airline, not only for impeccable comfort and service, but also for supporting her values and her vision. Mrs. Anderson, always with her knitting needle in hand, created a special project to honor Madeline, a blanket with the company's logo and a symbol of equality, which was auctioned to raise funds for charities. As for businessman Graham Mitchell, he became an informal Madeline advisor, sharing his vast experience in the business world and offering his insightful perspective. He also began to admire the firm and at the same time kind behavior of Madeline. Madeline, however, has never been carried away by compliments and fame. She remained humble and focused on her mission to create a fairer and more equitable world. He saw his success not as an individual achievement, but as a means of achieving a greater good. If you like this story, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Here you will find exciting stories every day made to touch the heart, and I'm sure the story that is appearing on the screen now will thrill you too. Don't miss it.